Ferrari just found something inside Lewis Hamilton's car in Bahrain, and it was not supposed to be there this early. Not after the overheating scare. Not after the rear instability. Not after that brutal engine shutdown that stopped the entire garage. But here's the part nobody expected. In less than 48 hours, the SF26 went from fragile and unpredictable to one of the fastest cars over a single lap in pre-season testing. 3/10 off Red Bull in race trim. Stronger in qualifying simulations. And according to internal data, Hamilton unlocked a performance pattern that even the sensors did not fully detect. This is not hype. This is telemetry. This is development direction. This is championship-level momentum, building before the first race even begins. And what Vasseur discovered during the final data review could define the entire season. Because it was not just speed. It was something much more dangerous. If you want to understand why Ferrari suddenly believes this project is different, subscribe now. Because the detail that changes everything comes at the end. Let's go back to the very first laps in Bahrain. Because this is where everything started to fracture. And almost nobody noticed it at the time. The cameras showed a calm garage. The timing screens showed competitive numbers. But inside the cockpit, Hamilton was fighting the car. The SF26 was sharp on entry. Almost too sharp. The rear stepped out under braking. Not dramatically. Not in a way that screams disaster. But enough to break confidence. And confidence at this level is everything. Charles Leclerc could live with it. He prefers a nervous rear. He rotates the car aggressively. He commits early. But Hamilton drives differently. He builds the corner from the rear axle forward. He needs that platform planted. Stable. Predictable. Without it, he cannot attack late braking zones the way he has done his entire career. And this is where the tension quietly began. Because on paper, the car was fast. Very fast over one lap. But Hamilton was not extracting its full potential. And when a 7-time world champion says something feels disconnected, teams listen. At least they should. Then came the overheating failure. Day 3. Full fuel simulation. High track temperature. Mid-run. Suddenly, power loss. Engine shut down. Silence in the garage. The extreme side pod concept, designed to maximize aerodynamic efficiency, was starving the internal cooling under sustained load. It was a bold design. Aggressive. Risky. And in that moment, it looked fragile. This was not just a mechanical issue. It was a philosophical one. Had Ferrari pushed too far? Had they prioritized peak aero over race durability? And here's where things quietly escalated. Because Hamilton did not just complain about balance. He started asking deeper questions about thermal stability, rear ride height sensitivity, and differential response under load transitions. That is not surface feedback. That is structural feedback. And Fred Vasseur noticed something in those debriefs. Hamilton was not reacting emotionally. He was diagnosing. Calm. Precise. Layer by layer. Almost like he already understood where the weakness originated. But that's not the real shift. The real shift happened behind closed doors that night. Because instead of defending the concept, Ferrari pivoted. Immediately. Revised side pods. Modified floor edges. Rear airflow stabilization changes specifically linked to Hamilton's braking phase instability. 48 hours. That kind of reaction speed is rare in Formula One. And it sent a message inside the team. This project is built around integration. Not ego. Not hierarchy. Integration. But here is the detail that changes the tone completely. When Hamilton returned to the track after those updates, his steering inputs became smoother. Less correction mid-corner. More confidence on throttle application. Telemetry overlays showed something subtle but powerful. He was no longer fighting snap rotation. He was shaping it. And shaping means control. Control means consistency. Consistency wins championships. But we are still only scratching the surface. Because what Vasseur found in the deeper data analysis after that session goes far beyond setup changes. And that is where the story becomes truly dangerous for the rest of the grid. After that session, when the garage emptied and the noise faded, Ferrari went deeper into the data. Not just lap times. Not just sector comparisons. Micro inputs. Throttle traces. Brake pressure curves. Differential locking behavior at corner entry and exit. And this is where Fred Vasseur saw something that changed the internal conversation completely. Hamilton was driving around a limitation without being told where it was. Let me explain. In medium speed corners, the SF26 showed a slight instability when weight transferred rearward during throttle pickup. Small, but enough to trigger long-term tire stress. Most drivers react to that with sharper steering correction or earlier lift. Hamilton did something different. He delayed initial throttle by a fraction, then fed power progressively, not to protect the engine, not to manage fuel, but to stabilize the rear aero platform. And the result was subtle. Rear tire surface temperatures stayed more even across the stint. Not perfect, but more controlled. This was not in the setup sheet. This was instinct. And when Ferrari overlaid his telemetry with Leclerc's, the difference was clear. Same car, same conditions, different energy phase. Hamilton was unlocking sustained electrical deployment at the end of the straight because he was not overloading traction on corner exit, which meant less clipping near top speed, which meant the car kept accelerating while others plateaued. 300 kilometers per hour and still pulling. 310, still pushing. 330, holding momentum. That is not visible on television, but is devastating over race distance. And this is where things become even more interesting, because during the technical debrief, engineers realized something uncomfortable. Some of the performance gain was not coming from new parts. It was coming from how Hamilton was using the car, which means the baseline concept might be stronger than they initially believed. But it also means something else. The window is narrow, very narrow. The SF-26 performs at its peak when ride height, rear temperature, and deployment timing align perfectly. If one variable shifts, the balance fades. And Bahrain, with stable temperatures and predictable grip evolution, was almost the ideal laboratory. So the big question started forming internally. Was this breakthrough sustainable? Or was it circumstantial? And here is the psychological layer nobody outside the paddock sees. When a team realizes the driver is elevating the machine, confidence inside the factory changes. Design meetings shift tone. Development direction gains clarity. Because now there is a reference, a target, a driving signature the car can be shaped around. Fred Vasseur did not just find speed in Hamilton's car. He found a direction, a proof that the architecture of the SF-26 responds to his style. And that changes development priorities immediately. Rear suspension tuning, differential maps, energy recovery calibration. Everything begins to orbit around maximizing that harmony. But before we talk about what this means for the first race, there is one more layer, one more detail hidden in the long-run simulations. And this is the part that could decide whether this story becomes a title fight or just another promising preseason illusion. Now we enter the long-run simulation. Full fuel, heavy car, track temperature slightly dropping as the sun begins to fall over Bahrain. This is where illusions disappear, because one lap pace can hide weaknesses. Race pace cannot. Hamilton starts the stint clean, consistent, low 1 minute 38 range, stable rhythm. But around lap 12, something begins to appear. Rear tire degradation. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, but progressive. And this is where most drivers start losing time in waves. One corner oversteer, next corner correction, then the rear temperature spikes, and the cycle repeats. But Hamilton's trace looked different. Instead of sudden drops in lap time, his decline was gradual, controlled, almost managed. He was using micro-lift and coast phases before the braking zone. Not enough to sacrifice straight-line speed, just enough to reduce rear surface stress. And here is why that matters. Red Bull's degradation curve was almost flat. Max could push consistently without visible drop-off. Ferrari could not. On pure race pace, the gap was roughly 0.3 per lap. Over full Grand Prix distance, that is significant. But here is the key detail. Hamilton's degradation pattern was improving as the stint progressed, which means he was adapting in real time, learning the weakness, adjusting his inputs, refining energy deployment corner by corner. That is not setup evolution. That is driver evolution within a single run. And Fred Vasseur saw something critical in that pattern. The car was not collapsing under thermal stress anymore. After the side pod revision, internal temperatures remained stable. The overheating crisis from week 1 did not return. That alone changed the mood inside Ferrari. Because durability means freedom. Freedom to push development. Freedom to experiment. Freedom to attack. But we are still not at the decisive layer, because there is a hidden vulnerability inside this apparent progress. The SF-26 operates inside a razor-thin window. Ride height variation of just a few millimeters changes rear stability. Rear temperature fluctuation of a few degrees alters traction feel. Wind direction shifts aero balance more than expected. In Bahrain, conditions were consistent. But what happens in cooler environments? What happens in high crosswind circuits? What happens when track evolution is unpredictable? If the operating window shrinks, the harmony disappears. And that is the real test waiting beyond preseason. Yet there is one more psychological factor building quietly. Hamilton sounds different. Listen carefully to his tone in the debriefs. He is not searching for excuses. He is not referencing adaptation struggles. He speaks about potential, about direction, about feeling integrated into the car's philosophy. That changes everything, because when a driver feels ownership, he extracts performance others cannot see. Fred Vasseur did not just find numbers in the data. He found alignment, machine responding to instinct, driver influencing architecture, a feedback loop forming before the first race even begins. And now the championship question starts to emerge. Not whether Ferrari can match Red Bull immediately, but whether this foundation can evolve fast enough to close 3/10. Because if development speed matches preseason reaction time, if rear degradation can be reduced slightly, if the operating window can be widened just enough, then the narrative shifts from hopeful rebuild to calculated assault. And the final piece of this puzzle, the one detail that determines whether this becomes an 8th title campaign or another near miss, comes down to how Ferrari handles pressure once real points are on the table.